protect my family. It's gonna be the last thing you ever do.
That was Jacob Dutton, played by Harrison Ford, and early in episode 4 of 1923, we learn his fate. Later, we learned something even more important. The show played a little bit of a trick on us, and that's where we're going to start today. Hey, it's Billy Dukes, and as always, there's time codes in the description section below. If you want to jump right to Jacob Dutton's fate, you can go ahead and do that now. Consider tapping subscribe while you're there, and then give a thumbs up if you're a fan. This is your spoiler alert warning, because we're going to go deep into the action of episode 3 and 4, beginning with Spencer Dutton. Spencer is the youngest son of James and Margaret Dutton, Tim McGraw and Faith Hill's characters in 1883. He's been traveling and working in Africa this whole time, mostly because he's really messed up after fighting in World War I. His bride-to-be is the daring Alex, and for the second straight episode, they spent most of their time finding new and creative ways to frolic around. Shout out to Alex for throwing not one, but 2 pieces of lingerie into that overnight bag she dumped in Spencer's car at the end of episode 2. These two are just a joy to watch, in large part because they're both very good looking, but also because I think everyone can summon up those feelings of new love. At the end of the episode, things take a very serious turn for the couple.
Spencer, your brother has been killed. By the time you receive this letter, I suppose your uncle has been killed as well.
They're reading Aunt Kara's letters that tells of John Dutton's death and an attack on Jacob. This would be Spencer's brother and uncle. It turns out he's had that letter for months, but we know that Kara expected it to take months to reach him. This means that Spencer and Alex are operating on a completely different timeline than Jacob, Kara, John, Jack, etc. They're more or less from the future, and this just blows my mind. Spencer's scenes are set in time several months after the scenes we're now seeing that show the fallout from Banner Creighton's attack on the family. Here is why that's important. Episode 5 of 1923 isn't coming for a full month on February 5th, and I believe that when the show drops, that time gap will be closed. All this tension is building up to Spencer's return. It seems to be the axis that the entire show is going to pivot on.
I can't wait for you to meet my nephew.
Previews showed a ship that's presumably carrying Spencer home, which means that when we rejoin the Duttons, the situation on the ranch will have moved forward significantly, as much as 6 months. That's especially important as it pertains to Jacob, but also the rest of the family as they work hard to defend the property from enemies old and new.
You'd be Mrs. Dutton.
I would.
Seems we're neighbors. I've acquired the Strafford Ranch.
Let's pause right there for a second because a lot happened that I think requires a more thorough vetting. This man is Donald Whitfield, played by former James Bond Timothy Dalton. He's financing the sheepherder Banner's campaign to build an army that can take over the Dutton Ranch. Side note, did any Yellowstone fans get strong Malcolm Beck vibes when they showed Donald in his office? Banner has already struck the first blow by stealing half of the Duttons' cattle and killing several men, including Bob Stratford. I totally missed this death at first, but Bob Stratford is the father of Elizabeth Stratford, the woman that Jack Dutton is set to marry. This is partially why Elizabeth's mother is so upset. We know from the trailer that Donald buys the Stratford Ranch. Again, this is the sign that there's going to be a big time jump coming soon. It would seem he's going to be both good neighbor to the Duttons and the one providing needed support to Banner. That's super sinister. Donald Whitfield may end up becoming my new favorite Yellowstone franchise villain, topping Malcolm Beck. In fact, I'd love to make that this week's conversation. Who's been your favorite Yellowstone franchise villain? Comment below. There was one more very important thing that happened in episode 4, but first I'd like to get to Jacob Dutton's fate. This episode opens with Kara Dutton tasked with cleaning up the blood after a day and night of surgeries. Her kitchen is a mess, but after an astonishingly brief emotional exorcism, she gets back to the work at hand. Quickly we learn that Jack and Elizabeth survived their gunshots, and before long we learn that Liz will stay in Montana and marry Jack, spurning a mother who wants her to move east. Then, just before a 6-minute long lovers sequence between Alex and Spencer, we find out that Jacob lived through the night after being shot multiple times by Banner in a gunfight that killed John Dutton Sr., He was the oldest son to James and Margaret. The gunfire happened in episode 3, and listeners to the Dutton Rules podcast know that I believed that Jacob was going to survive, in large part because Taylor Sheridan gave an interview with Deadline in which he says that both Helen Mirren and Harrison Ford are coming back for season 2. Later in this episode, it's Jacob who tells Kara to forget about the stolen cattle and attend the Livestock Association meeting on his behalf. She kind of improvises from there and ends up creating what we think of as the Montana Livestock Association, which John, Jamie, and Casey Dutton have all led on Yellowstone. Whenever Casey's out there doing police stuff, he's following in his great-great-uncle's footsteps. Up to this point, I've pretty much ignored what's been happening in the Native American boarding schools, and I've kind of done that on purpose. It's a crucial part of this show, and we made a full video explaining the reality of those schools that you should watch to try to even begin to understand the suffering. I'm just not sure that my fast-paced approach to these videos does that suffering justice. Long story very short, after a savage beating, Teonna wages war and kills Sister Mary, played by Jennifer Ale. It's violent and bloody, and enough to make my wife walk out of the room every single time. Please interpret my lack of conversation about this plotline as understanding of the proper time and place, not dismissal. I'm Billy Dukes for Taste of a Country. Thanks for watching, and thanks for subscribing.